Now recognize Ms. Green from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses that are here today. This is an important conversation due to the COVID-19 pandemic response, government lockdowns, forced vaccinations, school closures. Many Americans have lost faith and trust not only in our government, but also in the WHO, and it's extremely serious. The WHO colluded with the Chinese Communist Party. In January of 2020, the WHO repeated Chinese communist propaganda by saying that there was no human-to-human transmission with COVID. The WHO waited several weeks to declare COVID-19 a public health emergency because China insisted they had the situation under control, which was a lie. The WHO did not impose any travel restrictions, unlike President Trump, to help slow the spread of COVID-19 because China did not want their economy to slow down. The WHO continued to praise China's handling of the pandemic despite a globally recognized cover-up. The WHO went along with the CCP's fake claims about the origins of the virus not being from a lab, and our investigations and our own intelligence agencies have told us otherwise. The International Health Regulations, the IHR, is a treaty of the WHO meant to usher in a new era of global public health that requires all member states to cooperate to make the world more secure. The IHR requires only a simple majority to amend it. There have been over 300 amendments proposed, and member states will not be able to see these amendments before they are scheduled to vote. At an October 2023 meeting, the working group compiling the amendments for the 77th World Health Assembly in May 2024 was told that they do not have to produce their document before the meeting. Some of the amendments include expanding the ability of the WHO Director General to declare public health emergencies to include regional declarations as well as intermediate threats, allowing Director General to act on information in the public domain without verification from member states, and creation of a compliance committee to enforce their rules. I can assure you the American people do not want the WHO enforcing any rules on their own personal decisions regarding their health. If certain IHR amendments are adopted next year, sovereign countries, including the United States, would be obligated to adhere to the treaty. The Biden administration led the charge for amendments to the IHR, including a new compliance committee. The treaty would create a conference of the parties which could call on the United Nations for help in implementing the treaty. There is already talk of that conference of the parties being merged together with the IHR. While the Biden administration wants to entangle the U.S. in more globalist organizations and imperil the health and safety of American citizens, President Trump withdrew the U.S. from the WHO completely, wisely anticipating such precarious mandates as the ones being proposed. The move toward a global health security state is reliant upon surveillance, which relies on data. Remember China, that's what they did to their citizens and still do. The treaty and the IHR call for more sharing of personal health data in the name of safety and outbreak prevention. That's an invasion of privacy for the American people. The next step is to create a digital profile of everyone in the world, and if the WHO is giving binding power, the UN will essentially have the power to restrict any American's movement, access to health care, medicine, etc. I can assure you right now the American people will never comply with anything like this from a globalist organization regarding their personal health decisions, and as a matter of fact, any way they decide to conduct their lives. I think this is extremely dangerous. I have a question, Ms. Pace. The working group for the IHR were told recently they did not have to produce their final draft of proposed amendments to the IHR for the 77th World Health Assembly until the event in May 2024. How can the U.S. or any member state have any meaningful way to evaluate and consider the proposed amendments before they are put to a vote?
Thank you very much for the question, Madam Congresswoman. This is a really important issue for us, especially considering our leadership on the international health regulations, not only in this administration, but also going back to the previous administration. And so a couple of things in response. One, I want to be certain and assure everyone here that we echo what the ambassador said earlier about the pandemic agreement. That also applies to the international health regulations and any negotiations or amendments there. We are not going to accept anything that would undermine our national sovereignty. And in fact, the WHO does not have that authority over our U.S. health policies. And so I wanted to be sure and reiterate that. I think that in addition, one of the things that we are hoping, I also wanted to assure you, excuse me, that the U.S. is very much at the table for these negotiations. And so we do have visibility into the various amendments being proposed and the opportunity or ability to push back, again, as we need to, out of respect for our own sovereignty or other national laws and policy. And that is something we are absolutely doing if and when necessary. Finally, with regards to our own amendments, we did feel it was important to revisit the tiered alert system as we described earlier so that we are not in a position of scrambling in an outbreak, but rather have some intermediate alert whereby we can mobilize resources before we're all in a panic. Also, one of the reasons why we touched on verification of public information is because you had actors like the CCP or PRC not providing that. And so we wanted to provide a sort of alternate pathway, again, to protect America and the world in the event countries weren't being forthcoming.
Thank you, Ms. Pace. I can also assure you in a future Trump administration, given the way the WHO conducted itself, it could be very likely that we withdraw again from the WHO. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I now recognize Dr. McCormick from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Much like other international organizations such as the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, World Health Organization is vying to gain more authority through Pandemic Prevention, Preparedness, and Response Accord, in my opinion. This worries me greatly. Let me be clear, the United States should never, ever allow international organizations, specifically the World Health Organization, to impede our sovereignty, which I know you just reaffirmed. With that said, I think that when you designed the World Health Organization, it was intended to be a data gatherer, an observer, an informant to nations around the world with the goal of providing interchange of information from different healthcare organizations for emergencies. However, the Biden administration must ensure the WHO authority is limited to setting public health standards and providing a forum for countries to exchange information, but not to be given greater authority to infringe on our nation's sovereignty. Now, I know we had this debate on world tribunals and other areas where we have world organizations that want to overreach. I think it's really important when we talk about U.S. national interests, advance to these upcoming negotiations in the Pandemic Prevention, Preparedness, and Response Accord, which I believe both of you are involved in, correct? Ambassador, okay, so you're both on board. Can you both commit to complete transparency during this process?
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. We have been...
just yes, right, it's fine.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador?
Yes.
Thank you. Can you both commit to making the proposed treaty and amendments public, to any proposal public, to allow for commentary and opinion?
We have done so. Thank you, sir.
Great, and we'll continue to do
Yes,
so.
we
obviously.
absolutely will.
Okay, great. With that said, one of the things I'm worried about is we obviously have been compromised in the past, where we have been given misinformation and then propagated that information, which you fully admitted, and which we pointed out probably 10 times just today, where we propagated Chinese misinformation, if you will, whether it be just through not vetting the process or not thinking it through. We didn't really take the world's opinion. We just took one country's and kind of propagated that. That worries me in the future. My question is, how do we get the trust back? And even more importantly, I think, what have we done to hold China accountable? Or is there a way? Because I'm telling you, if you look at the World Trade Organization, for example, with China's been taken to court 27 times and defeated in court, we still don't have any teeth to actually hold them accountable. How do we keep countries like China and other bad actors from using the system, from giving us the inappropriate information? And how do we hold them accountable? Because I don't feel like they've been held accountable at all.
Well, I'll try to respond to this question, Mr. Congressman. It's an important one. As the ambassador said earlier, we are quite clear, particularly in multilateral settings, what we expect of all member states, including China. And even in our bilateral engagements, we also have been able to reiterate our expectations.
With all due respect, Ms.
Yes,
Pace, saying I expect you to do something and holding somebody accountable is like saying I expect my kid not to take cookies and then doing nothing when they steal them. What have we done to keep them accountable? Mr. Ambassador, I'll give you a shot.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Congressman, for that question. I share your concerns with how China conducted itself during this pandemic and continue to do so. And there are two things, instruments that we are working on, and I see those as instruments for accountability, the IHR and the Pandemic Accord. And let me be very clear, there's absolutely no room in the Pandemic Accord that will allow WHO to have influence or to make any determination over our sovereignty. Absolutely not. And as principle, Article number 3, as I've stated repeatedly during this hearing, clearly defines what countries have versus what WHO would have. I mean, they really affirm the leading role of each country over its sovereignty.
So I appreciate you answering the question you already previously answered, which is we're not going to lose our sovereignty. That's great. But the question that was never answered, and the reason we're here is to hold you accountable. The question is, what are we doing to hold them accountable, which was not answered?
No, I think we answered that very quickly. There are two instruments we are working on, the IHR and the Pandemic Accord, which are instruments that will be used for ensuring accountability.
Accountability for sovereignty, yes. But I guess my question is the bad actions. But I'm out of time, so I yield. Thank you.
I'd like to yield to the ranking member, Dr. Ruiz, for a closing statement, if he would like to make one.
I would. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And excuse my absence. I was opening a roundtable, national roundtable on healthcare with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and came back as soon as I could, right in the nick of time. So thank you again to the witnesses for your testimonies. The WHO plays a critical role in advancing global health security. Throughout today's hearing, we've discussed much of this vital work, improving access to care, surveilling for deadly diseases, administering life-saving vaccines, and more. And so before we conclude today, I want to emphasize again, for the record, that our work to prevent and prepare for future pandemics is not in conflict with enhancing international cooperation, but rather our efforts are strengthened and fortified by it. In all of our conversations, both today and going forward, I hope we continue to recognize the value our participation in the WHO brings to our nation's diplomatic, foreign policy, and national security interests. In fact, almost everyone in the panel today said that one of the biggest lessons learned is that we need to lead in this effort. And so right now we have the opportunity to not only enhance global pandemic prevention and preparedness, but also cement our nation's leadership in global health. And we can do so by continuing to foster international collaboration and advance reforms to the WHO. In the international health regulations, the pandemic accords are very vital, real-time priority instruments and tools to have the influence that we need in this space, and that promote transparency, improve surveillance, and strengthen cooperation with standards and norms. So these matters are of critical importance to global health security, and I hope that we can find ways to work together here in Congress and with our administration partners to pursue constructive reforms that will save lives and reduce harm in the event of a future pandemic. Again, I want to thank all of our witnesses You are in the front lines. Much respect. Thank you for your hard work. Thank you for your service to our nation. And I want to thank the chairman and yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Ruiz. And again, thank all of you for your time today. I think this has been extremely valuable. You know, the whole situation obviously is frustrating, but this committee remains committed to the shared goal of preparing for the next pandemic. Lessons learned, so that the issues that the WHO had, Chinese transparency, all of these, they're highly relevant to our preparedness here in the United States. My feeling is the more we can set the tone for what it takes to be prepared, others can as well, and could make an organization like the WHO much stronger if there's cooperation. Like every witness today said China was not transparent, they weren't forthcoming, all of those things. I can't help but think of Ronald Reagan's line, we need to trust but verify. That's what was missing, is the verification. And so why not trust? You assume people are going to be honest brokers, you would hope. And when they're not, and you can't check that, I think the lesson learned is organization, international organization, or at least ourselves, need to be there on the ground to see what the actual truth is. So I think that's one of the lessons learned. And I would say here too, like early on in the pandemic, I said to the administration, America needs to be hearing from the doctors treating COVID patients. That's who they trust. That's what every patient in America, person in America can relate to, is the one wearing the white coat that's there to say, I'm going to try and take care of you as best I can. Doctor, you know that feeling, and it makes a big difference. You know, we heard some comments today. Again, trusting without verification is a problem. If the president of one country is telling the president of another country, everything's under control, we got this, well, we see what that leads to. When you're lied to and don't know you're being lied to, then you don't give the guidance and leadership that you should. Honesty is the lesson learned. To me, the WHO needs full access. And the WHO, representing all of its partners, need full access to be able to do things correctly. We talked about revisions to IHR. We need that to be without political influence. You all have testified to that today, and I thank you for your work. I heard things today that I think are really good for us to hear. And we agree. U.S. leadership is indispensable in this process. And I was pleased to hear all of you talking about an agreement that protects the United States is your priority. And that's what we need to have. But I also agree that if we're going to protect the United States, we have to do everything we can around the globe when we're talking about a pandemic. It can't just be the United States. You know, without data, accurate data, without truth, without honesty, we can't help. We can't help fully or quickly, which is key to a pandemic response. So it became clear to me that the WHO's success depends on the United States. And that the United States is going to have to depend on honest data, access, and everything else through the WHO. So we can't have a situation where one country gets to deny us from being part of the team and controlling the situation on the ground. But I see a lot of opportunity here. I do have in front of me the draft and appreciate that this is public. And we need to go through it. We're here to represent the American people and the taxpayer dollars. So we want to know what the investment is and what it looks like. And so I appreciate the openness. There is a difference between an accord and a treaty, and that concerns members of Congress, as you can imagine. And I will say, so when in Congress, when Congress is frustrated, what's the power they have? The power of the purse. So we do want to be involved. We want to be involved with this so we can honestly report what the intent is, where the money's going, and how we're trying to make the world a better place and the health of America in particular. And with that, I yield back. And I want to again thank you all. With that, and without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and to submit additional written requests for the witnesses, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. And if there's no further business, without objection, Select Subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you all.